Welcome to the Black Entrepreneur Experience podcast, inside the business, buzz, and brilliance of Black entrepreneurs. Here is your host, Dr. Frances Richards.
Bonus episode. What happens in Vegas goes all over the world on Black Entrepreneur Experience, episode number 210. Thank you for joining us as we elevate the Black entrepreneur experience by interviewing CEOs, thought leaders, innovative thinkers, and Black entrepreneurs across the globe. I'm your host, Dr. Frances Richards. What happens when leadership development intercepts with the world's top business school? You get ExecOnline. Today we have CEO and founder Stephen Bailey. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Stephen, I've given our audience such a brief bio. Why don't you fill in the gaps and share with us what you'd like us to know about you and your company?
Great. Yeah, so I'll start with me. I am born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana. I have a very tight-knit family. I have made my way up the East Coast over time. My dad's actually from New York. And so funny enough, he's in New Orleans. And now my wife and I live in New York, in Harlem. And he comes and visits and reminds me of all the things about New York that I don't know. So that's a little bit about me. I am an entrepreneur, obviously. ExecOnline was my second company. I'm a lawyer by background, so I worked at a firm for a very brief period of time, realized that it wasn't nearly as creative as sort of what I was looking for from a career perspective, and so sort of moved into the world of entrepreneurship. And after being CEO of a company in Washington, D.C. for a period, I moved to New York and started my own company, ExecOnline. And as you mentioned, what we do that's very different is partner with the world's best business schools. So schools like Stanford and Columbia and MIT. Now we work with 9 of the top schools, and we take their executive education programs. So a lot of people don't know schools such as these top business schools, they have their MBA degree programs. And then they have non-degree offerings where you would get a certificate if you came on campus to any of those schools for anywhere from a few days to a few weeks. So we take those certificate granting experiences from the in-person experience to the fully online experience. And we offer those to companies, many of the world's largest companies, for their leaders. So for the first time, we have really allowed companies to democratize access to the world's best business schools and provide leadership development to a much broader range of their leaders than they've ever been able to do in the past. And so when I started that company in 2012, we were the first company to sort of create this space. We were taking these schools online for the first time in most cases. And it's been great to see how the industry's matured, obviously, particularly with COVID and also sort of the rise of Black Lives Matter. We've seen a huge sort of growth in the recognition of the need for these types of programs for leaders.
I was going to say, I know they are really loving Stephen right now with COVID-19 and helping them to navigate through that online process.
Absolutely. You can sort of preach for a long time about where the world is going, and it's amazing how quickly it can change. And so that was very much the experience of ExecOnline. So we were focused on 2 things from the very beginning. So from a mission perspective, what I was really passionate about was looking to democratize access to leadership development within large companies, and was particularly moved by the lack of diversity that you see. Black Americans, underrepresented minorities, women in senior levels of leadership in organizations. And I'm a big believer that learning is the great equalizer. But what you found was when it came time to invest in leaders early in their careers and provide them with the opportunities to end up as senior leaders in organizations, often those opportunities went to a very narrow set of individuals that had connections in the organization and been tapped on the shoulder. And not surprisingly, that group was not particularly diverse along race lines, along gender lines. And so a lot of the mission of ExecOnline from the very early days was, if we can democratize access to these world-class institutions and provide that to leaders within the world's largest companies, we can change the leadership landscape within those organizations from a diversity perspective. And so what we've found is really the confluence of two things at once. One, companies recognizing that online is the future, as they've had to move all of their in-person training and development online really overnight. And secondly, with the murder of George Floyd and the rise of Black Lives Matter, companies really recognizing the need to make fundamental changes in how they think about their leadership pipelines in their organizations and empowering a much broader range of leaders to have access to upper levels of management and leadership in these companies.
And speaking of Black Lives Matter and COVID-19, what shift or even elevation has happened to ExecOnline since we're in this season?
Yeah, so we've just had a tremendous, obviously lots of challenges. We're a company of, every company is made up of people. And so you can talk about the business and the fact that we've had a tremendous opportunity in front of us, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say lots of personal challenges as every organization, all of us are feeling as people have, faced health issues, school for kids, fears about the future. And so there's a lot of that, certainly that we've had to grapple with as an organization, but we've been fortunate from a business perspective that this is, sort of been a huge opportunity for us. So in many ways, it's accelerated the trends we were already seeing with respect to the shift to online learning. Frankly, I think it has put inclusion and diversity on the corporate agenda in a way that it has not been previously. I think in the past, there's been a lot of lip service, but not a lot of really substantive action by the corporate C-suite to address a lot of the disparities that motivated me to create ExecOnline. And we're seeing both of those things, sort of come to the top of the agenda for companies. How do I generally provide training and development to my organization in a totally virtual world? But then specifically, how do I think about the fact that Black Americans are 13.5% of the population, but are only, a little over 3% of senior leadership in organizations? How do I think about the fact that women are 51% of the population and are only about 25% of, sort of senior leadership positions? And how do I invest in things that are going to create true change? And so we've been very much at the forefront of that since 2012 when I founded the company. And we've, as a result of these two kind of converging factors, the business has just grown tremendously over the course of 2020. And some of our biggest challenges now around how do we keep up with the pace of growth, which are exactly the types of challenges we want to be facing. But just to give you a general sense of the change, if you take we offer online programs in a variety of different areas, and we've seen growth across those areas. Our fastest growth programs are focused on inclusion and diversity. We've seen over the, sort of the last several months, about a 400% increase in our enrollments in our inclusion and diversity programming. And we've seen a 700% increase in the number of C-suite leaders that are going through those programs to set the right tone for their organizations.
Excellent. That is tremendous growth. So talk about, Stephen, what was that epiphany that you knew that your business was going to be successful?
Yeah, so I think as an entrepreneur, and I know that there are a lot of, in your audience, people who are already entrepreneurs, people who are thinking about being entrepreneurs. And I will say the entrepreneurial story always sounds much cleaner and easier after the fact. So after, an entrepreneur is successful and they come in and they tell you the story, that just seems so obvious. Like there was this one moment and they knew they were going to be successful, and then everything else was just, straight line up. And I think no matter how successful a business ends up being, part of really signing up for entrepreneurship is the recognition that you're going to go on a journey. And there are going to be moments of tremendous highs. There are going to be moments that are lows. And there are going to be moments where you're questioning whether you're right about your overall business thesis, or you just have some bad luck and you've got to figure out how to make good luck out of bad luck. And so, for ExecOnline specifically, pretty early on, I had a lot of conviction that there was a big need here. So it was clear that companies were asking their leaders to really demonstrate different in kind capabilities as the global economy shifted. right? And so leaders were no longer just asked, even middle managers in organizations were no longer asked just to execute. They were also being asked to do things like innovate, to be able to pivot their strategies in response to changing conditions. Obviously, COVID being a perfect example of that, sort of an extreme example, to lead their teams through tremendous and almost constant change. And so organizations are recognizing we need different in kind capabilities, not just from the leaders in our organization that are on the website, those C-suite leaders, but the leaders of the organization in the middle that are really making the organization go. And so there was an opportunity there for sure. And there was a recognition that it was going to be really hard to provide high quality development to those leaders through traditional models of just bringing people in person for training. It was very expensive, logistically difficult. It was something you did for the few, but you weren't going to be able to do for everyone. And so that was the opportunity. And even early on in having conversations with companies, and this is one piece of advice, as you're thinking about your business that you might want to start or kind of your thesis, validate that thesis at every step of the way by having conversations with individuals that can help you either confirm or, sort of pivot your thinking on a particular topic. And so the more conversations I had, the more confident I was that this was a real need. Now, there's a big gap between identifying a need and executing, which is a whole, different. But it was from the very early days, I had conviction that this was the right type of thesis around the space, and that a business in this space was going to be successful. And then the question was, is it going to be ExecOnline, right? And that's what I woke up every day focused on. And I would say lots of stories I could tell you along the way. But at the time we launched our first program with Berkeley, with our first school partner, followed quickly by Columbia, it was clear we were on to something. It was clear that companies were excited. The leaders that were going through the programs were getting a tremendous amount of value. And so then it became, how do we execute? But when you actually had people experiencing the product, you had schools signed up, and you had companies that were investing, that's when it felt like, sort of our destiny was in our own hands, so to speak.
Speaking about highs and lows, talk about your worst moment in business and what was your takeaway?
Yeah, so my worst moment in business, and I actually philosophically, I kind of, maybe it's part of being an entrepreneur, I don't typically think about moments as being, oh, this is my worst moment. It's part of a journey. And everything that I've experienced, I try to genuinely, and you hear this a lot, it can be a bit of a cliche, but I think it's really important. I recognize that it is one moment in a journey, and it can either end up being something when if you think about writing your own memoir at some point, many of the things you read, I love to read biographies, for example, and maybe this is part of the reason why. Many of the things you read about great people, the moments that were the most challenging are the ones that they identify as being the most important, right? They changed the trajectory of their career. It opened their eyes to something that maybe they weren't aware of before. And so the price of greatness is adversity. There is no path to greatness without adversity. And so for me, that's the way I think about it. I would say one of the moments in my career that was certainly challenging, I mentioned that I was CEO of a company before ExecOnline. I was the first hire of that company, so very early joiner. One of the things I learned is that even if you're very early, and even if you end up being the CEO of a company, founding a company is very different than even being the first employee in terms of your ability to kind of really set the course for that organization. And also, frankly, the financial benefits that flow from it are very different for founders versus those who might come in even soon after. And so for me, as that business grew, I took that company from, sort of an initial concept to a business that, worked with about half of the Fortune 500 and was growing very nicely. But due to some disagreements with the two founders of the business, I left the company at a time when I felt like it was the right thing to do, in that I was not going to put my name as CEO behind an approach that I didn't agree with. But at the same time, when you've built something for so long and you've put so much time into it, even if that's the right answer, it's still very challenging to just have to sort of step away from not just the company as a business, but also the team you help build and the clients that you have and all of those things. So that was a very challenging moment for me, but that's what led me to create ExecOnline. And so I see it as both a really challenging moment, but to my earlier point, a moment that changed the trajectory of my career.
Speaking of success, there are so many brands and businesses that are successful. Talk about a brand or a business that is successful, that is dominating, that you admire, and why.
Yeah, so a Peloton is a company that I really admire. It has a lot more similarities to ExecOnline than you might think at the outset. And I think part of that is related to kind of how we view learning versus how Peloton views exercise, right? So one of the things that we pride ourselves on is a focus on the learning experience itself. So we don't think of learning as content to be put online. We think of it as an experience that is enabled by content and by technology to help leaders really solve some of their most challenging business, sort of issues. And so when we build, what makes us different than a lot of other online learning companies is when most people think of online learning, they think of, I'm going to watch some videos, I'm going to read some content, maybe I'll listen to some recordings, and it's all about that. For us, we actually start with the experience of what the leader wants to be able to do coming out of their program with ExecOnline. And so they're all picking a specific project or business challenge that is important to them, and we're helping them solve that challenge through the ExecOnline experience. And so experience is everything to us, and results are everything to us, the ability to measure the outcome. And that's what I admire so much about Peloton is they've been able to take what was, if you think about the exercise bike, it was just a static piece of hardware, and they've been able to turn it into an experience virtually, right? And so you're able to have social interaction with peers, you're able to benchmark your performance against others, you're able to set fitness goals for yourself and see yourself accomplish those goals, and you're able to do it through a variety of different formats. And so they came into a space and they revolutionized it by a focus on experience versus a focus on what is a static, sort of thing that sits in the home that, before Peloton often collected dust, that being the exercise bike. And part of what I admire is also it was a long journey for them. It was not immediately apparent to investors and to the broader world that this was a good idea. And it's been a journey for ExecOnline. We've created a market. In 2012, no one believes that very senior leaders in organizations would go through an online program over the course of a number of weeks and fit that into their busy schedules and take it seriously and not only enjoy it, but be able to apply it in really practical ways. And it's been 8 years to get to a point where now everyone is sort of recognizing that potential in much the same way that Peloton took them a number of years to get the market to realize that the exercise bike could be something totally different than how it had been conceived before.
On your track with ExecOnline, do they do anything on the entrepreneurial track, or is it mainly just certification? Because I know some of the other B schools do, or some of the grad schools do offer entrepreneurial certifications, and a lot of entrepreneurs come through there. I think Wharton does it. Do your company have anything like that?
Yeah, great question. So our programs span a range of different topics. Think about the full set of different topics that a business leader or an entrepreneur might need. So think about strategy, leading global teams, financial acumen, as I mentioned earlier, diversity and inclusion. So there are a wide range of topics that we offer. What we do offer a set of topics that tend to be popular with entrepreneurs. And those really relate to innovation, which is a big area for us and one of our more popular programs, actually even for large company leaders. But we also have some individuals that sign up for our programs, and innovation is an area that's very popular amongst entrepreneurs. Another area that's popular, what we call change readiness and agility. So the ability as circumstances change to really be able to kind of understand, sort of how to lead people through those changes, which can often be very disorienting. And then thirdly, an area that I think is really important for entrepreneurs is financial life. And it's not one that immediately comes to mind, but I think you end up finding that a lot of entrepreneurs have a great idea, but they don't necessarily understand how that's going to translate into a business, in particular into a P&L for an organization. And so understanding some of the basics of finance, not becoming an expert, not to say you're going to be a CFO of an organization, but having an understanding, what you would call finance for non-finance people, right? Of how businesses are structured from a financial statement perspective and what are the things you should be thinking about as a leader as you structure your business, which is, yes, it's about product. Yes, it's about customers, but it's also about the business model that you create to unlock value.
Talk about your ideal client, Stephen.
Yeah, so we work with part of what is really exciting about ExecOnline is that we work with such a wide range of different organizations. And so typically with a business, you might be catering to small companies or large companies or companies of a particular industry. For us, because leadership development is such a universal challenge for organizations, we see clients that, span, we have some of the largest companies in the world as our clients. We have non-governmental organizations. We have governmental organizations. We have relatively small companies as clients. So it kind of spans the full range. I would say that for us, where we see the ability to deliver the most value are in organizations where there's a recognition that leadership really matters and is a differentiator, because we focus on leader level individuals within organizations. And so a significant leadership group is important. And then secondly, in organizations where they are in complex business environments that are constantly innovating and changing, such that leaders need to always be on top of how to manage through those changes, both from a business perspective, but also from a human perspective as well. And so we tend to see a lot of adoption of what we do in kind of cutting edge industries, like technology, healthcare, where you've got these large populations of leaders that are being asked to lead their part to the organization through a very dynamic business environment.
When you built your business model, was your business model online or was it actually in person? And how did you shift in person during COVID-19?
Yeah, so we were always completely online. So we had that benefit from in terms of what we offer to our customers. So that piece of it was, many ways for, 8 years, we've been saying the world is moving online. If you're a company and you're thinking about how to develop your leaders, online is the future. And people can understand that intellectually, but it's not until they're confronted with it in many ways, sort of in a very obvious and straightforward context, where the switch sort of flips. And so I'll give you one example. I mentioned earlier that we focus a lot on experiences. And part of creating great experiences is our live events, right? So live video, where leaders are coming together and interacting with the faculty in our programs, different peers from their organization and from other organizations. And before COVID, especially if you think about the average, called a middle management individual in an organization, that person might have never been in an online video session before in their life. And so when someone comes to them and says, we have this online program and you're going to be online on video and you're going to interact with peers and you're going to do all these cool things, in their mind, they don't really have a frame of reference. Like, what does that mean? That seems weird. I don't know. Maybe I'll do it. Maybe I won't. After COVID, everyone's familiar with Zoom. Everyone spends time with family, with work, with our coworkers online, probably more than we'd like, frankly, at some point. But it changes the frame of reference for organizations and for individuals, and that is a lot of what has turbocharged our growth.
What book would you recommend and why?
As an entrepreneur, my favorite book to recommend is The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. And it's about a young kid in Malawi who grew up in a small village with limited access to, sort of high quality education because you have to pay school fees. And there's not sort of a general public school system, and his parents didn't have a lot of money, but just very naturally talented, naturally curious. And his small village was facing a famine and didn't have access to energy for irrigation or for, sort of any other purpose. And so he created a windmill in his village that for the first time provided wind energy to his village when he was 12, 13 years old. And once again, no one showed him how to do it. He was able to conceive of the idea and lead the effort to develop the idea with very little, kind of formal instruction and oversight. And as an entrepreneur, it says a couple of things. One, just what's possible, right? And really thinking about the ability to overcome tremendous obstacles in order to achieve success. And now William has gone on to do great things and has had, done his own TED Talk and, kind of moved beyond where anyone would have expected given where he started. And the second thing it says, and this is a lot of the mission of ExecOnline, is, sort of as a society, as a world, we often are under-resourcing our most talented people. And that's the benefit of inclusion. That's the benefit of diversity. When you limit upward mobility to a narrow set of individuals, there is so much talent in the world that remains untapped. And as a society, if we can recognize the urgency of identifying and supporting talent wherever it might be, whether it's in a small village in Malawi or whether it's in New York City, the better off we'll all be. We'll empower a lot of people, we'll improve a lot of individual lives, but it's something that also would just make our society and our world so much better.
Talk to a younger Stephen. What advice would you give?
A younger Stephen, I would say one of the big pieces of advice would have been to kind of come to entrepreneurship a little bit sooner in terms of what was on my radar screen. So I didn't grow up thinking from a young age, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, I'm going to start a company. I went to law school. I went to a law firm. If you would have asked me what I was going to do the day I went to law school, I would have said, be a lawyer. And so I learned through exposure to, other people and the interesting things they were doing. I had some friends in law school who were starting their own businesses, or in some cases had started businesses even before law school. So that was something that kind of opened my eyes to what was possible. And at the same time, I spent some time at law firms over the summer, and I was like, I don't really see myself doing this long term. I can see myself doing it maybe a couple of years, but it's not really who I am. So I learned a lot about myself in law school that actually, I learned a lot about the law, but I learned a lot about myself that had nothing to do with the law as well. And I think that's just emblematic of, as African Americans in this country, one of the challenges we face is that we're not exposed in many cases to entrepreneurship early enough in our lives as a real opportunity. And it always seems like we're exposed to, something after, right? It's become, kind of a huge opportunity for wealth creation in our society, right? And so we're locked out of corporate America for a very long time, and still are in a lot of ways. But that kind of made it onto our radar screen, and so some people were able to kind of advance, and then others moved on to Wall Street. That was sort of the sort of next thing, and then we kind of followed there. Once again, not nearly enough, but to some extent. And then it's like, oh no, we moved on to entrepreneurship, and we're kind of. And so for me, a lot of it is early exposure, and really making sure that we are represented in the areas that are the biggest wealth drivers in our society, which continue to be, sort of entrepreneurship, access and control of capital, and arising to very senior levels in corporate America, all of which we have a lot of, work to do in terms of making progress.
Speaking of early exposure and entrepreneurship, what advice would you give someone that's listening and they're saying, that's exactly the track that I want to follow, and I'm having challenges getting that exposure or access to capital or execution? You've dropped some major value bombs. Talk to someone that is really struggling at this moment.
Yeah, so I recognize, that I was fortunate to have some exposure. It might have been a little bit later, but to still meet really interesting people. And a lot of that was a testament to the, sort of sacrifices my parents made to, provide my sister and I with really high quality educational experiences and, broaden our horizons in a lot of ways. So I never like to sort of impart my own experience onto someone else, because everyone's sort of starting from a different position. But I will say that entrepreneurship is something that opportunity to make sure that one lives their life without regret. So if you're, someone who has always been thinking, I want to be an entrepreneur, but I'm not sure, it doesn't mean that you don't have to plan for it. There are financial realities. It doesn't mean you don't have to save to do it. But in terms of on your list of priorities, how likely are you to prioritize it? One of the best pieces of advice I got actually from a mentor, the law firm I worked at for a couple of years, you can always fall back on kind of the 9-to-5 that you had before. I'm not sure law firm's 9-to-5, but relative basis. But if you have an idea and you want to be an entrepreneur, try it, because if you don't, you're going to live your life with regret. And you're always going to wonder what would have been like if I had gone for it. And, if you go for it and it's successful, great. If you go for it and you fail, you've accomplished something as well, but you should have answered that question for yourself And a lot of life is about that, right? So that's one piece of advice. And then the second piece of advice, more specifically to businesses, is I'm a big believer in having a thesis around whatever industry or space that you are looking to be an entrepreneur in. So a lot of people zone in on the business and sort of say, I want to start. And it doesn't matter. It can be, sort of starting a restaurant, or it can be starting ExecOnline. What is it about the space you're in, your market, so to speak, that gives you conviction that what you're doing is out in front of or providing, sort of value for that market need? And so a lot of times, if you kind of think about it that way, you'll see a lot more opportunity, and you'll be able to craft a business that's going to stand the test of time because you have some informed view on where the world is today and where it's heading and how your business fits into that.
How does a thesis different from a business plan?
Yeah, so they're related. And in fact, I think any good business plan has a market thesis built into it. So a lot of people think about a business plan. They think about how much in sales am I going to do, or revenue am I going to do, and what are my costs, and what does my profit look like, and who's my customer, and all those things are super important. They're all, important elements of a business plan. But I think every business plan should start with a view on the market that you're serving. Where is it today? Probably even more importantly, especially in such a dynamic world, where is it heading? You should always have a view on, once again, whether it's a restaurant or ExecOnline. I probably say restaurant like my wife's a chef. So, she's thought about these things quite a bit. But it's not just about serving your customers in your market for your restaurant today. What are the demographics of that community? Where will they be in 5 years? Will the restaurant that you're opening today continue to cater to those individuals in the future? And if so, how do you maximize that? And if not, how do you fix that, right? And so thinking about the future and the market is super important in any business plan. And I would also say then sizing that opportunity is also very important. So you have a thesis around a market and where it's heading. What is the size of the opportunity if you really get this right, right? So if everything sort of falls into place, how many people could you serve? How much revenue could you generate? How many profits could you generate, right? So those are kind of the macro questions before one sort of then delves down into how are you going to capture that opportunity with your particular business idea.
Stephen, what problem exists in the world today that you would like to solve?
There are many. And I think, one that I'm super passionate about, this issue of inclusion, particularly for African Americans in this country, and particularly in areas, like I said earlier, that are the key wealth drivers in our society, right? And so I'm a big believer in controlling your own destiny. And as long as African Americans are locked out of these wealth drivers, our ability to control our own destiny is always going to be, as a people, is going to be somewhat limited. And so, as I mentioned before, whether it's entrepreneurship, whether it's access to capital, so the people who are funding entrepreneurs, or whether it's, rising to senior levels of leadership in corporate America, I think there's huge room for improvement in all those areas. I mean, just to give you a sense, I've been in the entrepreneurship game since 2006. I've raised lots of capital, both for my current company as well as the last company. And all of that time, part of what you do when you raise capital is you go around to different investment funds. So for our company, there are different ways to fund a business. We funded our business through venture capitalists that have invested in our company with the expectation that, at the end, they're going to get some return based on, sort of the growth of the business over time. There are lots of different funds all over the country that focus on those types of investments, sort of hundreds, thousands of funds that do it. In all of my time sort of raising money for businesses, I've met 3 African-American partners at funds. That's since 2006. And one of them is now a very good friend and is on my board. But it just gives you a sense of how much underrepresentation exists. I'll give you another example. My investors, kind of several different funds invested in ExecOnline, they all have annual CEO summits where they bring together CEOs from all of the different companies they've invested in to kind of share what's working, best practices, all of that sort of thing. And so in a given year, I go to 3 of these events. And across those 3 events, you might have 200 different companies represented. And it's a good year if I run in 2 or 3 other African-American founders or CEOs of those businesses. And that's not to call out those investors. It's pretty much the same across any set of investors in the space. So there's a lot of work to be done. And I'm really passionate about doing it.
Thank you for sharing that. If you conducted the interview, what is one question that you would have asked yourself? I want you to ask the question and answer it.
What makes an entrepreneur different than others, right? That maybe don't pursue the entrepreneurial path, I think is a question that I always think about myself, but also that I think a lot of people might want to know. And I would say that a lot of what makes an entrepreneur different is perspective on the world and kind of how you view it. And there are a couple of things, even though my parents weren't entrepreneurs, as I mentioned, wasn't on my radar screen, there's a couple of things that they taught me were really important as I kind of embarked on entrepreneurship, sort of maybe preconditioned me to be an entrepreneur even before I knew that that's what I wanted to do. So one was just a passion for being the best at whatever it is that you decide to do. Be the best. And I feel like every entrepreneur that really is going to invest a significant portion of their life and take the financial risk to become an entrepreneur has to have that passion about something where I want to be the absolute best at whatever it is I'm doing, because it's really hard to start a business and be successful if you don't have that passion. If you sort of say, I'll just be another online learning company. I'm fine being the fifth best online learning company. Yeah, entrepreneurs typically don't think that way. So that's sort of one. And then secondly, my mother used to tell me this all the time, and it used to drive me crazy when I was a kid, but I'm so glad she did. Whenever something would happen and I would come to her and say, well, I wasn't able to do this because X, Y, Z happened, she would say, there are no excuses, there are only reasons. Okay, so, and I feel like as an entrepreneur, you got to live that every day. You just have this mentality that no matter what happens, you have the ability to to prevent a reason from becoming an excuse, to sort of face adversity, make the changes you need to make ultimately to get to a successful place. And that has to be something that motivates you and excites you and really kind of drives you. Because if you don't like confronting really difficult challenges, if you don't like figuring out how to make what seems impossible at the time possible, then the entrepreneurship journey is going to be a challenge.
Stephen, talk about your top 2 influencers and what lessons did they teach you?
So my top 2 influencers were definitely my parents, as I've talked about them a lot already. I shared a little bit about what my mom taught me. That was probably the most valuable lesson that she taught me. My dad, in many ways, just taught me how to be a man. And my biological father actually passed away while my mom was pregnant with me. My dad met me for the first time when I was 18 months. My parents, sort of married, and I grew up with my dad as my only dad. And at no moment, even to this day, sometimes I forget, right, that he wasn't there from the absolute sort of very beginning. And I think his ability to be such a great role model, to teach me big things and small things, just about, how you treat your family, how you manage the professional responsibilities you have day to day with kind of your family obligations, and always keeping your priorities straight and your family first. And then just, frankly, how to be a successful Black man in America. The different challenges you're going to face, the different times where you're going to be angry or upset about what's happened to you, and how do you prevent that from rubbing off on the other things that you are focused on doing in your life. And so I was very fortunate to have 2 parents that I really can say were kind of raised me in a way where whenever I'm facing a challenge or a difficult time, they're always in the back of my mind in some way or another around how I should handle something.
Stephen, we've come to the part of our interview, and it's called Fun Facts Lightning Round. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I want you to answer them very quickly. Are you ready for the Fun Facts Lightning Round?
Let's do it.
The last movie you saw?
Not a big movie person, especially now with COVID, but I will say that my wife and I are rewatching, we're big TV show people, so we're rewatching The West Wing right now, which is one of my all-time favorite TV shows. In the current world we're in today, with some of the lack of leadership that we have, it's refreshing to sort of close your eyes and think about perhaps a different president with different leadership capabilities.
Your favorite singer or rapper?
I'm from New Orleans, so this is an easy one, Lil Wayne.
What food you eat every week, no matter what?
Every week I'm eating tomatoes and avocados without fail.
You relax doing what?
I relax reading, and funny enough, listening to podcasts.
Your favorite dance song?
This is very controversial, but I'm going to have to go with Mo Money, Mo Problems, back from the days of Puffy and Biggie.
Your favorite month?
November, because it's Thanksgiving. I'm a big family person, and being able to get together with everyone is always one of the highlights of the year.
Your first job?
My first job was, funny enough, I was a freshman in college. It was actually my summer before my freshman year of college. And I did an internship, a law firm where I was like a clerk in the mailroom. So, just sort of sorting mail and making sure people got their lunch orders and all of that. That was my first job. And I realized that it's a big difference between being in school and having to show up every day for work. And so that began a long journey.
Stephen, do you work out or hit the couch?
Work out for sure.
What can we do right now, Stephen? You can take your time and answer this to support ExecOnline.
I appreciate you asking that question. I would say for me, what's most supportive is to help support the mission that ExecOnline stands for. And so as we think about, sort of these inclusion issues in our society, and we focus on corporate inclusion, but there are many other areas where, as African Americans, I believe we should be demanding a different in kind focus on inclusion that goes beyond just lip service and is really focused on outcomes and different in kind investments to achieve those outcomes. And so thinking about in each of our worlds where we see that opportunity to be advocates for inclusion, taking risk and taking stands to help make a reality is something that as ExecOnline, as a founder of ExecOnline, and I know as a representative of the tremendous employees and team members that we have, that would go a long way in supporting what we really believe is important to making the world a better place.
Stephen, before we let you go, why don't you share with our audience the best way that they can connect with you and do business with you? And feel free to give all your social media handles.
Sounds great. Thank you, Francis. So our website is execonline.com. You can find us on Twitter at ExecOnline Inc. And you can find me on LinkedIn if you just search for Stephen Bailey and ExecOnline.
Thank you, Stephen. That's a wrap.
Thank you for listening and subscribing to Black Entrepreneur Experience. We would love for you to leave a review and rating on iTunes and share with your friends. For show notes and more episodes, go to www.beepodcast.com. Join us next Wednesday, and remember, green is the new black. So keep your bank accounts and your business in the black.